Hi,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. I'm gonna let Erica in.
Where are you?
So this is a virtual background. This is actually Astor House, which is the New York Junior League's townhome.
Right, yeah, I've been in it.
So,
Very nice. Hey, Erica.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you. We have a nice group logging on today.
yes, yeah.
Excellent. I was just looking at the list. That's great.
There are some other organizations I recognize some of their names and I can't remember offhand where they're from, but there's several different organizations that are on there right now. So
Yeah, it's great.
And some of whom we've worked with before. The YMCA, Christchurch, which is Cornerstone,
yeah,
Morristown.
good, 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 good.
Back in the day, though. It's been a while.
Back in the day.
Yeah. Uh,
All good stuff. All good
What did
stuff.
you guys make out on Sunday? That was a nice event.
That was really nice.
Yeah,
I'm like looking at my hair like, oh well, I
I
should
know. I hate it. I look at it all day long. I can't stand. That's why I cut it. That's why I cut it all off.
pull it up right now. It drives me nuts. Sunday was nice. It was great to be outside and like see everybody, you know?
I know. I thought they did a good job. I wasn't expecting that.
I wasn't either. I was in heels. I
I know.
eating the grass. I told Mark, I was like, I should have worn flats. I'd go get my golf shoes out of my locker. I'd rather wear those.
I have learned over time that if I'm going to wear heels to the club, they need to be wedges because chances are I'm going to end up on grass.
Yeah. Oh, well, I've got to learn that now. So that's my lesson. I was not happy. I was happy when we sat down, but for a while I was like tiptoeing around because I literally kept sinking through the wet
I
grass.
know. Well, we had a nice little gig going in the back corner.
We did. It was good.
Yeah,
It was a good group of people.
it was.
Out. It was warm. So all good.
Good
Oh,
fall day.
yeah. Are the kids in school this morning?
Oh, they are. They will be. I locked my office door because they will be arriving home in about 45 minutes, like a tornado. It's great, though. I have to say, I mean, it is an absolute game changer having them in 5 days a week. Mine are first, third, and fifth, so they're all at Washington.
Oh,
They're
that's
all on the same
oh,
schedule, and it's like a dream come
nice.
true, honestly.
That's lovely. That's
Yeah.
really lovely. We've got different schedules, but Jack's the middle school's like every other day
Yeah.
person, and it's a little like it's fine because now he manages it all on his own and he's okay. But at first, I was like, "What day is it?" Because it's like their schedules change each day, and
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with, and when you have your own stuff going on to manage all of their schedules and moving parts.
yeah, it gets a little crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy, but it's all right. They're so far so good, and I'm glad that they're able to be out there. Like he had his first middle school cross country meet on Tuesday. He has another one today.
Fun.
Like they're
That's
getting
great.
kids out there, so it's good.
Feels like a little bit of normal, right?
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah. Um, Dee, are you sharing your screen?
Yes, I am. So I'll put you through I'll transition you from slide to slide.
Okay, thank you.
And should I start letting people in?
Yeah.
Okay. Got 16 so far.
Oh wow.
When you kiss me, I know you don't care to, but I still want that. Just trying to tell you.
Maybe we can start with with a little housekeeping just to have people mute themselves.
I have the power to mute everyone.
We'll give it like 1 more minute. I'll start an intro. That way we have enough time for you guys to do your whole presentation and take questions at the end. Go ahead. You know, Dee, I'm going to go ahead and get started just with the intro, if that's okay with you.
Sure, please do.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is put together by the Junior League of Summit. This is our fall community program. We try to do these twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. We always choose topics that are timely and relevant, and I think we hit the nail on the head this time. For those of you that aren't as familiar, the Junior League of Summit serves not only Summit, but Chatham, New Providence, Berkeley Heights, and Madison. And we are a women's-led organization that trains volunteers to be effective leaders and board members within our community. Today is one example of the type of trainings we like to put on. With us today is CCS Fundraising. We have Dee Falvo and Caroline Chick. CCS is a strategic fundraising consulting firm based in New York that partners with nonprofits to raise funds and strengthen organizations for their futures. Dee Falvo is one of our presenters today. She has over 17 years of experience designing and implementing significant fundraising campaigns and programs for leading national and international nonprofit institutions. She specializes in campaign management, donor and external messaging, leadership, and major gift fundraising. We also have Caroline Chick, who is a partner and managing director at CCS. And Caroline has over 20 years of experience working with nonprofit organizations all over the country. And she has served and counseled organizations with financial targets ranging from 5 million to 3 billion, which is more than our budget. So, and she has assisted clients in raising more than $500 million in last year alone. Today's presentation is entitled From Crisis to Opportunity, Leveraging Your Mission and People to Achieve Success. Dee and Caroline, go ahead with your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Erica. So just as a reminder, keep yourselves on mute, but if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or enter a question into the chat feature. So really excited to be presenting today. I'm a member of the Junior League in New York. I'm actually virtually broadcasting from Astor House. And so we're really thrilled to be able to meet with all of you today, share some of our insights and lessons learned over the past few months. So our conversation today is going to focus on giving you a sense of the landscape. What are we seeing over the past few months? How has COVID-19 and all the social justice issues impacted philanthropy? And give a sense of what we're thinking and seeing and experiencing on different trends, how past experiences really are impacting our decisions today and into the future. And then providing you with really actionable takeaways and tactics that you can use to help with your fundraising plans for the next year. So focusing first on the philanthropic landscape, there's a lot of different trends that we've been seeing, and some of this is lessons learned from past crises, and a lot of this is just in the past few months, so much has changed. It feels week by week there's new news and new things that are happening that impact what we're doing, but we're seeing a shift from the immediate crisis that occurred in March and how things are starting to transition and become more manageable despite the challenges, and how people are really coming together to step up. And that's everything from corporations and foundations who are doubling down to help with philanthropy and nonprofits, as well as individuals who are volunteering and giving their time and really wanting to make that impact at their local level. So the first key point is that Americans are loyal to their philanthropy. And a few things to note. nearly or over $1 billion is given away every day, over $1 billion in philanthropy. So what that means is that somebody is asking them to give, and that's really critical that nonprofits are continuing that their efforts around donors and engaging them, not simply just communicating, but also asking them for their support. That is definitely a critical piece, not to stop what you're doing. And as we looked at some trends over the past few months and some surveys that have been done, what we've seen is that the majority of people are either maintaining their giving or they're increasing. A very small amount of donors plan to give less. And I think the reason for this is obviously everyone is in different financial circumstances, but those who do have the ability are leveraging their dollars to make sure that nonprofits can get through this. So when we look back over the past 40 years or so, and we see different crises and what has happened, everything from 9/11 to Hurricane Sandy, a lot of different things have impacted philanthropy. And what this shows is that there have been some ups and downs based on the different recessions and things that have happened on our economy and natural disasters. But what it shows is that the philanthropy has bounced back. It is resilient. It doesn't necessarily create a massive downfall that then continues for years and years. The Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, that probably was sort of the biggest effect that we saw in philanthropy. But again, it did rebound. And something that's critical to know about this is the nonprofits who were able to rebound quickly are the ones who continued getting out there, speaking to donors, sharing their mission, their impact, and continuing their fundraising plans. So when we think about philanthropy and looking at the different types of donations, who's giving, we know that most of the wealthy population are the ones who are giving a significant portion of the dollars that are donated. This has definitely been a trend that we've seen, over the past several decades. But in particular, this year with everything that's happening, those with the significant capacity to make these large donations, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, they're really stepping up to the plate and doing what they can to ensure that organizations have the funding they need to really implement their activities. And another critical piece is that volunteering. Volunteering is such a huge part of how nonprofits function, not simply because they need volunteers at the organization to help do things, but volunteering creates an investment in the individual and their experience with the nonprofit, and helps not only with getting volunteers to become donors, but maintaining them and growing over time. So whatever you can do as an organization to really focus on your volunteer efforts, knowing that this is a time when we can't be together, that we have to social distance, creating opportunities for people to volunteer, whether it's through Zoom, through a mentoring program, or being able to donate and collect items. That's really a critical piece to show that you can still do your part, even though you maybe can't come physically to the location where you are to help out day after day. So as I mentioned, the top people really are giving, but foundations and corporations as well have really stepped up. They are contributing, over nearly $12 billion over the past few months. That is globally for COVID-19. So there are a lot of things to think about with corporate and foundation giving, because obviously there is that grant process, that's the relationship development. But what we've seen is that there's been a little bit of a shift to make sure that companies can get the dollars to the nonprofits who are working directly with people who are impacted by COVID-19. And that doesn't necessarily mean just the hospital who's treating patients. It's all different types of organizations that are helping with food security, ensuring that people have access to the things they need, people who perhaps are out of work, ensuring that there is daycare. So all of those things are really important, and we are seeing foundations and corporations take a step back from some of their restrictions. Not that they're completely getting away from their restrictions, but they're trying to loosen some of the guidelines so that these nonprofits can get the dollars quickly. So let's talk about how foundation giving is in New Jersey in particular around COVID-19. So what we've seen is that there is a lot of competition. There are thousands and thousands of nonprofits in New Jersey. And as you'll see here, there is a limited base of donors who are giving to the COVID-19 related or, philanthropy. So 35 foundations have given over 21 million away in New Jersey. And as you can see from this little heat map, it shows where New Jersey nonprofits are located and who's getting what funding. Very local in Union County, we have seen that nearly 4 million was given away to 23 different organizations. So it's a lot of competition, just thinking about the amount of organizations on this call and then thinking about all the other ones that are in the area. You definitely have to make your case as to why you should be getting this funding. And Caroline's going to talk us through some recommendations. But again, this is all about demonstrating impact, demonstrating that you are still in your community, still working with your constituents, and that you're still having, really connecting with people and ensuring that your mission is being achieved. And looking across at other foundations as well, there are a few key foundations in New Jersey, some of which that are specifically focused only on this geography, but several that are focused on around the country. And these foundations are among those who have given over $1 million away to New Jersey nonprofits. They're really taking a stand and saying that this is an important geographic area. We tend to have a lot of competition with New York City and Philadelphia, but luckily there are some nonprofits that do see, some foundations that do see the importance of investing in New Jersey. So as if COVID-19 was not enough, we had significant challenges earlier this year in the summer and the late spring. The racial justice movement is something that has been such a critical aspect of how organizations are responding and doing things and really ensuring that they are providing that environment that is focusing on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there's a lot of nonprofits that are very focused in that area that are receiving these funds and being able to really demonstrate that they are putting this first. However, this is obviously a national list of organizations, significant dollars, but we are seeing that local nonprofits, perhaps it's not their primary mission, but they do work in this community that directly impacts people from different backgrounds. So being able to demonstrate your core mission and how you do impact this is another way for you not only to access funds, but to be a part of this. So now let's just think about here, we've done a few surveys over the past few months with organizations around the country. And so we've had, over 1,000 different nonprofits participate and offer where they stand, what they're thinking, what they're experiencing. And so what we have seen is that while donors, their behaviors are shifting, it's not simply because of what's happening. They're still giving, and they're giving more in many cases, but their giving is expanded in some ways. So there are individuals and companies and foundations that are giving in ways that they haven't done before. Annual fund, operating, staff salaries, those things that keep the lights on. Traditionally, those are areas in which funders shy away from. It's people who are very invested and understand who will give unrestricted. So this is becoming more of a trend because they've realized how important these things are in order to maintain the nonprofit. And there's definitely more of an emphasis on the impact. Again, this isn't simply the population you're serving, but also how are you directly impacting and benefiting people who have been affected in these different ways. And most important, of course, is that board members and those who are most engaged as volunteers are stepping up, and those are the ones that we're turning to first for their support. So back in May and then in, I believe in June, so it was April, June, and then this past month, we did a survey amongst different nonprofits. And so what we're seeing in these trend lines, you see the first point on the left, and then there's two other points. So what we've seen is some good news. One is that the revenue is recovering. So there is a downward decline on the nonprofits who thought they would be experiencing a significant impact on their giving. And that dark blue line, what it shows is that it's actually increasing. So luckily, the impact on fundraising has not been as severe as we thought it would be back in March and April. And when we look at different sectors, human services are the most likely that are seeing the increase in their fundraising efforts. There are many of the organizations who are affecting these populations that are most impacted. So definitely that's one key area that's been doing well. Sadly, the performing arts, that is a critical area that has been most affected, not simply because they've had to shut down their theaters, they haven't been able to do their performances, and that's a big part of their revenue, but they're finding more challenging ways to connect with people and help them see how they're still impacting and providing culture and opportunities that people, during this rough time. And then, we've turned into this big virtual world. All of us are now well accustomed to being on Zoom. And this is where, I know some of us are experiencing Zoom fatigue, but I do think that this transition of having these galas and these big events on Zoom has been something that's really exciting for people. It's a way for them to feel like they're connecting and experiencing things and not just, being able to be stuck in their house. They're actually getting to see others. So we've seen success in a few different areas with this sort of virtual angle. So solicitations, we have a lot of clients who are successfully meeting with donors on Zoom, sharing what they're doing, and making the request. And in many ways, these have been really successful because you have a finite period of time. You're not necessarily scheduling and having to travel somewhere. It's not over a lunch or a dinner, but you're able to have a really impactful conversation in a 30-minute to 1 hour session where you have that engagement. And then overall, when we look at the fundraising plans, and anyone who has been in the middle of a campaign or who was thinking of starting a campaign, for the most part, everyone's staying the course, but they are following their, what they're doing with COVID-19 and other social justice issues, and really making that a highlight so that they can show what they're, how this campaign is going to benefit all of that and the constituents that they serve. And so just again on how nonprofits are staying the course, current donors are remaining steadfast. So you have your top givers, you have your board members, those who have given you year after year. Those individuals are still giving, but we're still accessing emerging populations and new donors. So it's really critical that you don't just focus on those who have given to you in the past year, but looking at lapsed donors and looking at people who have given to similar causes. And now there's a lot of more activity in different ways. The personal phone calls are something that are really important. We have one of my clients did a phone-a-thon in the spring, and 11 staff members called over 8,000 people. And through that phone-a-thon, the things that they heard and what they chatted about, it wasn't simply, can you give to us? It was, how are you doing? And so that's why those phone calls, especially at this time, are really important and meaningful. Social media has been huge, just as much as it has been in the past, but social media has really allowed people to demonstrate and visually show how they are still achieving their mission, despite the fact that we are all social distancing. And then for events, so this is something that's, obviously the spring, everybody was forced into it. Many people changed their fall plans either to postpone their events or they did them virtually and are planning on doing them virtually. We're still seeing a lot of success around this, but in order to engage people and really make them feel like it's a meaningful event, there's a lot of new tactics and ideas that we're employing in order to make them really successful and not just putting something on the screen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caroline Chick, who's going to talk through our recommendations and how you can actually put all this into your plans. Caroline?
Thanks, Dee. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you and good to be here with you. I'm just going to build on what Dee gave an overview of in terms of all of the information that we have aggregated from many of our clients and other nonprofits, both locally and nationally, and as well as the experience that we've had as a fundraising firm for the last 70 plus years and what we've learned historically from trends of natural disasters, health crises, and economic crises over the years. So these would be general recommendations. Naturally, every nonprofit has its own unique culture and ways of operating best practices. So we're offering, more generally speaking, recommendations moving forward through this time. I'll talk a little bit about what we, the things that we can control and cannot control. Some of the principles that we know have withstood time through crises and allowed nonprofits to thrive through those times. Using that information to affirm your own brand as a nonprofit, and really double down fundraising efforts and create a plan to move through it and grow from it. So what we're looking at here in terms of what we can control and what really is out of our control. We don't necessarily know how the markets are going to respond to all of this, but as Dee showed on one of the slides previously, we've never really had a philanthropic recession until 2008, 2009. So philanthropy has bounced back quickly through natural disasters, through health crises, through all of the economic recessions until that 2008, 2009 period. And we're seeing that happening again already. So the market is volatile, and philanthropy is very much correlated with the market, but nonetheless, we're seeing an increase in giving. We don't necessarily, again, know how people feel about DEIJ issues, about COVID itself, and there's a broad array of different responses to this. But we do know that just generally speaking, donors, want to be part of the solution. Donors give to a winning cause. So, we never really want to fundraise on desperation that, unless we raise money, we're going to go under. That's not the recommended messaging. We want to celebrate the successes that are happening and create messaging around that allows your donors to be part of this solution to push through this time. We don't know how long this will last, but we do know that the impact that different organizations can have in this moment and long term. So, to have plan A for sort of the short term and then a longer term view of how to move through this will lend itself to being more viable longer term. And just lastly, when we survey, and this trend is sort of consistent over the years, when we survey donors and to get an understanding of why they stopped giving to an organization, the number one reason is because they feel disconnected. So if there's ever a moment in time to communicate with your donor constituency, it's now, to really make people feel connected, that you're still there, you're still operating, you're still serving your own communities, is really relevant to help stay in front of people, keep them connected and keep them giving. Just the next slide, Dee. So some of these timeless principles, Dee mentioned this earlier, but again, looking back at the recession from 2008 to 2010, we took a deep dive into giving trends during that time. And those organizations that might have been in middle campaigns or just about to launch, those organizations that really pushed through and continued activity, even if it was at a slower pace, came out the other end far above those organizations that chose to pause and halt fundraising. So it might have been a sort of a knee-jerk reaction at the beginning of COVID to not ask people for money, not do anything. But we would certainly encourage you to stay the course, continue to communicate, and tell your story and stay in front of donors asking for money. Rather than pausing, doubling down on that activity is almost required to get through this. So, creating a really robust calendar of communications, of gift requests, of cultivation and stewardship opportunities. Dee again talked about the events, and naturally a lot of events were canceled. Many were turned into virtual events, but we would recommend not embarking on wholesale cancellations, but having a plan to pivot and adjust so that you can continue to move forward, even if it's with an adjusted strategy, but stay in front of donors and keep that plan of action in place. In terms of developing action plans, to have sort of a 3-month plan from here to the end of the year, and then perhaps a 9-month plan to get through the end of this fiscal year, June 30th. Perhaps there will be a vaccine that will be widespread by then, and then a longer term plan where we see more normalcy in our behaviors and in our daily functioning. But to have these different action plans in place through a fundraising lens is going to be important. And use this opportunity to reaffirm your mission. So, you know, donors need to feel connected, as we talked about, but also need to feel good about their support of your organization. So keeping your case relevant right now, you know, what are you doing regarding staying in front of people? If you're a school, whether it's the remote learning, the support of your students, both academically, but also psychologically through this time. What are you doing about social justice issues? And really being a good steward of the mission of your organization as it is aligned with these really relevant issues right now, and using that to reaffirm and to tell your story during this time. Erica, I will, you know what, I'll pause. Erica's just asking how often one would recommend communicating with donors, and it really depends on the level of donor and the role that they have with your organization. So board members, I would be communicating with very regularly, weekly, biweekly, you know, not just during board meetings, but throughout that process, particularly if they are large donors to your organization. You know, we want to be very good stewards of them through this time and have empathy for their own situations. For your broader constituency, you know, depending upon how robust your donor base is, I would just, you know, use the general rule of look for opportunities to communicate. Whether there is something terrific that happened that should be, the story should be told, or something that's coming up, or so, you know, an adjustment in how you're doing things. You know, monthly newsletter type of communication is always a good idea. But when you're talking about people that are giving large sums of philanthropy to your organization, making sure that somebody is in charge of communication with them, and that there's a regular calendar of communication. So, you know, again, it might be weekly, it might be monthly, sort of depends, but just have that plan in place and make sure somebody's tracking it. In terms of, you know, reaffirming your brand, you know, what does that really mean? So this is an opportunity to show how your organization is committed to your core values. And again, aligning it with what's happening in the world right now. You know, showing empathy for how people are experiencing this, whether it's related to social justice or related to health concerns, allows you, as you know, as a solicitor, to really have a thoughtful conversation with your donors. So, you know, communicating with empathy is going to be important throughout this. You know, and creating what your own unique value is during this time. I was on the phone yesterday with an animal organization, and you know, COVID isn't focused on animals, and nor is it focused on social justice issues. But you know, animals provide a real comfort to people during this time, at a time where people really need companionship and they feel isolated. So I just use that as an example of how, you know, where they're coming from in terms of their messaging and how they're connecting with their people, because for them, they need to keep their lights on and their doors open because the animals aren't going anywhere. And they really serve a unique purpose during this time. So whatever that means for your organization, think about the relevancy in this moment. in terms of, redoubling efforts, just the next slide, please. Again, this isn't time to pause. We probably have all been working harder than we have maybe ever worked during this time, through crisis management to pivoting to different strategies, and then now trying to make sense of all of this and having a long-term view. But really doubling down on those efforts is critical. So, reminding people, reminding your own donor bases that it's necessary to continue the pace of activity to be able to come out of this in a healthy and fiscally stable place. And that's going to be required to continue your mission. Looking for ways to engage people and connect with them. With many of our clients, we've done things like town halls where perhaps the president of a school or a university brings in the top 50 donors, and it's sort of an exclusive briefing and an opportunity for conversation. It gives them the opportunity to ask questions, makes them feel well connected. We brought together leaders of very different and diverse organizations on panel discussions and invited their donors to come join the discussion. We've had very intimate discussions. We just did one with Jazz at Lincoln Center, Wynton Marsalis, and through the lens of a DEIJ sort of racially focused discussion. So, and it was really interesting. All of these major New York philanthropists put themselves on camera, and you could sort of see who was tuning in, and it was almost a cultivation tactic itself. But the point is finding ways and creating ways to get in front of donors right now, tell your story, give opportunity for them to give you feedback and have discussion will really help cultivate them through this process. In 2019, we saw major disasters, natural disasters. We saw significant public policy shifts, human rights violations. So, the giving to these different crises really was heightened. So we saw almost $2 billion just on Giving Tuesday alone last year. Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 1st. So we would expect to see that again. Now, you probably experience the same where our inboxes are being flooded on Giving Tuesday now. So I certainly would not limit your outreach to donors to just that one day. It should be, one opportunity of many. But to make your nonprofit unique and stand out on that day is a real opportunity, because we see significant giving. It's an opportunity to acquire new donors. It's an opportunity to present match or challenge scenarios. And again, to just tell your story, create a lot of excitement around what it is that you're doing. But Dee opened by saying there's a lot of competition in the area. And there's just competition for the philanthropic dollar across the board. So how do you, on Giving Tuesday, make your organization stand out and, get the return that you're looking for? Now, the next slide, there's a lot of information here, but I'll just talk through a little bit of it. The first thing is, making sense of your donor base and prioritizing your donor base. So your strategy for your top 25 donors is going to be different than your strategy for probably the remainder of your donor base. But really getting organized and segmenting your donor base so that there is a strategy for each segment of that donor base is important. So what are how are you communicating with your top 25 or 50 donors? What's the strategy for outreach? What are you going to be asking of them during this time? And then what are you asking of your mid-level donors? What's the outreach to them and the messaging around that? And then sort of the lower tier of your donor base. But looking at it in that way ensures that you will be providing outreach to all of your donors in ways that are really tailored to their level and perhaps to whether it's industry or how they're involved with your organization. There are a lot of different ways to segment it, but it can be a highly personalized way to approach it. So as you think about your audience, tailoring that messaging to them, it's going to vary based on what level they're giving and again, how they're affiliated. But philanthropy is very personal, and that messaging should be personal, and it should be done where possible in a personal way. So, talking about right now, Zoom meetings, and people really are becoming more comfortable with this. We're doing a lot of solicitations over Zoom, where in March, we would have never recommended that. Now we're doing it successfully because people have just reached a level of comfort with it. Or, locally, if you're able to meet people on their back patio, or, somewhere where they feel safe, that's always an excellent idea too, particularly, again, at those higher levels. But tailoring the messaging to all levels of your constituency is important. Moves management, you might be familiar with that concept or not, but it's the process that begins with identification of a donor and moving that donor through the cultivation stage, the briefing stage, ultimately to a gift request, and then stewardship. And, having an organized system in place to move donors through that system, looking forward, is going to be important, particularly now when we're not able to be in person, we're not able to have these events where everybody's coming together, to make sure that they do stay connected. And then just in terms of, the foundation and corporate support, Dee commented on the level of foundations.
It's all upstairs, Pops. Okay.
Could I just ask somebody to mute themselves? Foundations have stepped up in ways that they never have before. And a lot of this money is going to COVID. 2/3 of the COVID money, or money raised around COVID issues, has come from corporations. Typically, corporations represent a very small percentage of overall philanthropy. So they are giving a lot of money away to this specific issue. So, really cultivating that support and leveraging that support right now, again, is fortuitous. Thinking about gift structure and how to really maximize the size of gifts. Most organizations need cash right now. And there are many donors that are well positioned to accelerate their giving at this moment. So if your organization is struggling to make ends meet operationally, and you've got people with 5-year pledges, it might be a good time to go back to them and ask them to accelerate their giving. With certain populations of your donors, it might be a good time to have a discussion about gift planning. So incorporating your organization into their longer term philanthropic priorities. And then lastly, just, inspiring your board to really step up, make unprecedented commitments to help get your organization through this time, and setting goals and financial benchmarks, both so that you can bite off sort of manageable pieces along the way, but also to give you reasons to celebrate along the way and sort of use that as a platform for success. So you might set a year-end goal, meet or exceed that goal, celebrate it, and move on through the first part of next year. And just lastly, as we look to the future, this is a good moment now to really take stock in what has occurred and to pause for a moment to look forward. So, really assessing what has worked well throughout this period and what has fallen flat. We're all struggling to navigate this, and the most uncomfortable part is sort of the unknown. So taking a look at what your organization has done well, what hasn't worked, but also at what other organizations have tried, and what has succeeded. And then recalibrating that and refining the focus so that you as an organization understand where you want to be by December 31st this year. So sort of that 90-day plan. And then what's beyond that for the first half of next year. And then just having plans to continue to be able to be nimble and pivot during this time. So I've encouraged most of my clients to have plan A, but also plan B and plan C, because no one knows how long this is going to go on. No one knows how people are going to respond and react, or God forbid, what else might come our way. So just to have, multi-pronged plans in place to be able to survive through this, and not have it take too hard of a hit on you, your financials from philanthropy. So that wraps up our presentation. We are very happy to answer any questions you might have, or give some clarity on any of the topics that we just discussed.
A question that was sent in directly to me on events. So are people doing in-person events? Is everything virtual? What are people planning to do in the spring of 2021?
I can start that, and then we can open that up for discussion. I can give a little bit of a sense of what we're seeing our clients do. We have seen people do very successful virtual events, and even in some cases raise more money than they historically have raised. And most people are planning on virtual events through the spring. I did have a call with a client yesterday who, it's performing arts. They've got a big theater that obviously can't be filled. For very high level donors, they are planning on having people in person, socially distanced, for a live performance that would then be broadcasted via Zoom to the other attendees. So, they're just finding ways to pivot. But I'd be, opening it up to this group to talk about what your plans are for the spring.
And I'll just add that, most of the clients that I'm working with have just determined we're going virtual. I did have one client actually last week that had their very big event on Thursday. And up until Monday, the Monday prior, they were going to have their top donors come in person. So it was going to be a small group of about 50 people that would be there in person. And then the decision was made 4 days before the event that, given everything, it just wouldn't be feasible or realistic to have people come in person. So my big recommendation is make a choice and just plan around that. And the more time you have to plan, the more successful the event would be. So we have a couple questions, comments around all of this, around events. So can you give some examples of successful virtual events and some examples of unsuccessful virtual events? And then the second question about events is what can you do to be unique because of the high level of Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, keep them really focused and short. People don't necessarily, I don't think any of us want to be on Zoom for 3-4 hours at night. The really successful virtual events that I've seen have been an hour. And it's always helpful. We never really fundraise off of the celebrity platform. That's not really our MO, but when you're talking about getting people together, if there's some real pull, some draw, certainly think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whether it is a performer or a unique speaker, and that'll definitely help people wanting to actually sign on and watch the event. As far as trying to make it unique or offer some unique experience, so some organizations have done a 30-minute sort of pre-show or pre-program that is available to a select group of people. And then the longer program, the next phase of it, is open to everyone who either bought a ticket or a table, or they've done where, some organizations, especially in the arts and culture arena, they have offered it, publicly to everyone. And they've done where they've, done sort of an online ask during that performance. So there's different ways that you can try to create certain things just for one particular audience. One event that one of my clients worked on, they did a special in the opening, the first sort of in the background, in between the different speakers and at the beginning. They scrolled the names of all the top donors. They also scrolled the names of people who say, had bought tables every year for the past decade. So different ways to recognize people that they could, be out there sharing photos from past events. So there's different things that you can try to make it unique, but I agree on the short program and where you can have someone that you can really put out there and have a reason for people to want to actually watch. I think any other questions, whether it's around events or another topic with fundraising?
I would be curious to know of who's on the call right now. What has worked for you, whether it be events or otherwise, over the last few months, and what are your biggest challenges, or what are you nervous about in the next few months?
I would just say that one thing that makes me nervous is losing momentum with donors and losing momentum with supporters, because there are so many competing, competing and very compelling causes out there right now. Mm-hmm. And, I liked a lot about what you said about continuing to make our messaging unique and relevant. But that is a challenge. And I think people are, that along with, there are people, we're not necessarily talking about the 1%, but the group of the population that's sort of like the mid-range donors who really are facing financial issues. And so we're losing traction with some of that group merely because they just don't have the extra income right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost think you can't over communicate with people right now. And just even with those donors that might not be able to give at the levels they have been, at least over the last few years, staying in front of them regardless, perhaps having longer term strategies for them. I know, we did a solicitation this week with somebody. It was a New Jersey organization, and they're in an industry that has been, hit pretty hard right now. The ask was still made. Payments are delayed. So the first payment isn't going to be until the latter part of next year. It doesn't help for this year's bottom line. But it keeps that, it keeps the traction with that particular donor. So being flexible on payment terms, being flexible on gift structure, that kind of thing, as far as the actual fundraising helps. But just the ongoing communication. I mean, you're absolutely right. People are there. There's a lot of competition. There are a lot of great causes. So, I go back to that, the relevance, creating some excitement around what it is that you're doing, and then making sure to communicate that to all levels of donors.
Another question that just came through. Have you found that communication to donors to be more effective from the executive director versus the development director?
Yeah, it's really important to put the right person in front of somebody, and to be able to determine when you need to bring out the leadership. So whether it's the executive director, the president, the CEO, the chair of the board, even having people team up. So chair of the board and the president, or whomever is the leadership. That's an important thing. I mean, I would go through the list and strategize on who is assigned to this in terms of the next meeting, or whatever is next for this person, actually make an assignment. And, you know, pull out the big guns when you need it, because it's, you know, people, one of the old adages is people give in relation to who's asking them. So even if it's not an ask, it's just sort of a briefing meeting, thinking about who in your universe is most influential over that person's decision making is really important. And then, you know, as you work with your leadership and your volunteers, making sure they're well prepared. So doing a lot of that heavy lifting for them in terms of prepping them for those meetings and making sure that they're comfortable going in. They know exactly what their objectives are, what the goals of the meeting are, what their talking points are, all really important.
And I'd add that it's, you know, depending on the topic, there are things that will be better coming from a volunteer leader like the chair of the board. It demonstrates credibility, it demonstrates that volunteers are still actively engaged. And, you know, again, that sort of personal connection of who they may know, you know, also just helps in that communication. Looks like we have another question. So they're looking for in-kind donations, and one donor offered plastic dividers, for example, and now we're on the lookout for a donated washer and dryer. What do you suggest? A blanket asked to all constituents. So around in-kind donations, how do you approach that during this time?
I would say a blanket ask. In this case, a blanket ask is appropriate. I think you'll get a lot of responses probably. You know, that's not so significant in terms of a financial hit that somebody wouldn't, you know, I don't think that needs to be targeted. I think a blanket ask will reap the greatest ROI in terms of in-kind for these types of things. And just remember also recognizing donors for that contribution. So an in-kind gift still has financial value to it. So placing sort of a value against that, and even if it doesn't hit your bottom line, it still should be recognized at a certain level and donor thanked.
Absolutely. Another question just came in. What would you suggest to develop an email list for an education-focused nonprofit that has a very small list and located in a low-income area?
So the way we approach fundraising or prospecting is you're looking at the intersection of three things. The capacity of the donor. So donors that have the ability to make gifts at the levels you're seeking. Affinity, so they care about what it is that you're giving to. In this case, you know, whatever area of education this is in, that people that care about this, and they've demonstrated that through their philanthropy to similar places, and access. So, you know, your ability to actually access that donor, that a relationship exists. So it's sort of the intersection of those three things makes the best prospect. So naturally you would look as you're building a prospect list. In this case, you would look at philanthropists in the area who have given to education related initiatives. You'd look at philanthropists that have given to low income areas, maybe particularly that low income area, but also others. And, you know, naturally people with the capacity and the affinity to do this. So looking at others, you know, looking at historical philanthropy. So where are donors giving? Look at similar organizations like yourself and their donor lists, or philanthropists in the area. I don't know what research tools you have, but there are a number of tools that can sort of zero in on high net worth individuals in the area.
And this is where, you know, ideally your board can help support this in just thinking about their own network. And oftentimes, you know, board members can feel like, oh, I ask my friends, you know, and my colleagues all the time. But if there's sort of actionable things that they can do with it, so it's not simply asking their friend to give $100, it's asking their friend, we have this great mentorship day coming up that's going to be all virtual. can you help volunteer and speak with students for an hour? So things like that where you can get them involved first before necessarily making the ask, so that board members feel like, okay, I don't ask for money, I'm asking them to do something for our kids, around whatever your education focus is. And then if there is a company in the area, perhaps not in the exact town you're located, but if there's a company where perhaps you can help recruit a potential board member or leadership board member, that might help in then accessing people from that company who might consider giving. And so we have two other questions. As far as being flexible around giving, are there any must-haves to make it easier for donors to give? So for instance, leveraging technology, social media platforms, a monthly subscription. I definitely would agree with that. Definitely the flexibility is really big, and especially for annual donations, if people have the opportunity to do that on a monthly basis where they just sign up for a reoccurring commitment, that makes it easy for them. It means that it's automatic. The credit card is just getting charged and you don't necessarily have to track them down for invoicing purposes. But you have to be able to then steward them and make sure that you're thanking them along the way so that they feel like they're still connected month after month. And social media platforms, definitely really big. It's not, we definitely always encourage having some type of give button on your website and in your different social media pages, but the social media helps you tell your story visually, through words, through videos. So really having that accessible so that people can see what you're doing, even when they're not thinking about making a donation. And then another question, are there free research tools that you can suggest for building a prospect list? There's lots and lots of different research tools available, some paid, some for free. Obviously starting with Google is a great thing. But then there are some other resources where, some websites will have things. It depends on the sort of level of the person and, whether or not there's publicly available information. So I think we can probably send around perhaps like a few different websites that might be helpful for learning more about people who are giving and potential philanthropists. So we can share some links afterwards. But I don't know, Caroline, if you would add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at if people have family foundations and 990s are publicly accessible. So it'll show where they're giving, what their assets are, that kind of thing. I would look at annual reports of other organizations. Look who the top donors are. Most organizations have their donors listed by gift level. So vet the annual reports. And there are some tools that will go through PDFs. So if you have particular names you're researching, that kind of thing, it'll search the internet and include PDFs, which a Google search might not necessarily pull up. So there are a number of different things, but yeah, we can certainly circulate a list.
Don't see any other questions coming through, and I think we just have a couple minutes left. Erica, I don't know if you want to close us out, or definitely we're thankful for everyone for joining today. We hope you got a lot out of the presentation, and I'll turn it now to Erica.
Caroline, thank you, Dee. It was an excellent presentation. I actually received a couple of text messages along the way that people were really, really tuned into this. As a reminder to everybody who signed up with the Junior League of Summit to watch this presentation, Jen is going to be sending it out. We'll send out the deck of the PowerPoint presentation to everyone. If you joined later on or maybe didn't sign up, or you got the link from a friend, email jlsofficemanager@gmail.com, and Jen will send the deck to you as well. If you'd like more information on CCS fundraising, their website can be found, ccsfundraising.com, and I'm sure Dee and Caroline would love to speak with you. Oh, their information is on there too. Thank you. So this concludes our fall community forum. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Dee. We really appreciate everybody joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon then.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.